Hello and welcome to the Financial Wellness Hour. I am your host, Hirsch Serman, and I'm thrilled to have you join us on WGSN-DB, the Going Solo Network. This show is for people who are wanting to learn more about financial wellness and creating it. And we're going to look at different life cycles, and we're going to explore them both financially and emotionally, because personal finances are rarely about the money itself, but more about the emotions associated with your finances. And the truth is, the healthier we are emotionally, the better decisions we tend to make anyway. You could be listening to us on YouTube, on Facebook, on a myriad of platforms. We'd love to hear from you. We'd love to make it more relevant because our discussion might be fairly general. But if you do have questions, please do reach out, or you can reach me at my website or through my website, lifecycle.financial. That's lifecycle.financial. Talking about making things relevant, I'm excited for today's show, Should I Prepare for Mediation? Because I believe the mediation process and the roles and responsibilities that people have through the process are so often misunderstood. I mean, one quick example, when I went through mediation training, I was blown away. It was a huge eye-opener as to what the role of the mediator is. If you're stepping into mediation and you're not even sure what the mediator's role is, and that's only one of several, yours, your spouse's, there might be attorneys, etc., you really do need to have clarity, and you need to know these things before you enter mediation as opposed to figuring it out as the mediation is going. My guest today is going to help us with a lot of this. Michael Cohen is going to bring clarity to the mechanics and the mediation process. A little pressure there, Michael. Michael is the founder of Michael's Mediation. I have got to know Michael over the last couple of years through shared clients, but also several groups and initiatives that we've worked on together. And I always appreciate the insights that you bring and kind of that clarity of the situation at hand, which going through a mediation and reading the parties from the mediator's perspective is so important to be able to do that. So Michael, it's a pleasure to have you. I'm so happy to have you on the show. Welcome.
Hey, Hirsch, thank you so very much. I'm so excited about this, and the feeling is very mutual. I've always respected everything you're doing in the financial and tax world.
I appreciate that. We've spoken. I know a little bit more about your background, obviously, than our listeners. So I'm going to ask, can you share a little bit of kind of where your passion comes from? Why mediation? How did you get into this? So people kind of understand that before we even start to talk about the divorce process and mediation itself.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question because I started my career in corporate America, and I led teams and I managed teams, and I knew how to get teams from A to B. And then I went through a divorce, and I didn't know anything about divorce. And like so many other people, you're usually going through it the first time. So you just follow what you think you need to do. So I ended up asking a friend who they used as a lawyer. I liked him. I hired him. I'm still friends with him, but he was a litigator and he wasn't an amicable lawyer. So our case was litigated. And that's not the only reason that it was a tough divorce, but my spouse was very litigious. We were in court all the time. And I sat there thinking there's got to be a better way. And I learned about mediation. And as I sat in court over and over and over, I realized there's a better way to do this for couples. You don't have to go through this. So while I was working, I took some vacation, I took some time off, and I got certified as a mediator. And I just had a passion to do that. I had the opportunity to start it after my career, and it's been the best thing I've ever done.
It's funny, there's so much resonated with me because that's the same story I have. I just went on the finance side versus the mediation side because corporate America, born and grown kind of thing, the last thing in your mind, right, is, oh, I'm going to mediate divorce, right? I mean, it's just not on your mind. But I find also that you kind of get these instant street creds with some of your clients, knowing that you've gone through what they've gone through. I don't know if you've ever experienced that. So,
yeah, absolutely. And in fact, like yourself, I'm financially trained. I have my CPA, not as credentialed as you are in some of the other areas, but I understand a lot more than just mediation. But what I bring to mediation, I think mostly is the empathy and the understanding of what they're going through, because I've been there, I've seen it with my own children, and that's what I try to help bring to my sessions. And that's the real value of working with someone who's been through it.
It really is, because for somebody who hasn't been through a divorce, I think sometimes not understanding the emotional charge going on inside of somebody, or the concern or sometimes fear of what the outcome is going to look like, it can be a very hard process for somebody to go through. And having that compassion, I think, goes a long way, as well as empowers them a little bit to be able to say, look, it is a tough process, but it's doable, which sometimes people, I think, feel a little hopeless going through the process. They're not always sure where to go, or they don't feel understood, or whatever it might be. I think there's a lot of that goes on.
Yeah. One thing I'd add to that also is that a lot of times divorce feels very reactionary. There's so much emotion that there's just instant reactions that people have, and they don't understand that the impact that those reactions have on their family, on their children.
Right.
And, we're going to talk about finances a little bit, but like I've always told my clients, your most valuable assets are your children. So how you act, how you co-parent, that's going to impact your children. Those are your most valuable resources.
Right.
Don't be reactionary. You have to think in a different way when you're a parent, because it does affect the children.
Yeah, and this kind of gets into a question around, it's related to our topic, but not directly. But so you have an opportunity to role model, like you've just said, in some ways, or, how is it going to impact them? Are you thinking about them? Sometimes we're just thinking about ourselves. What are some common mistakes couples make in general when deciding to proceed with their divorce?
Yeah, probably the first one is, like myself, I made this too. I thought I had to hire a lawyer. And there's a lot of good lawyers, and there's reasons why certain couples need to hire a lawyer, but you don't have to start that way. And then even couples who hire a lawyer, they don't understand, like I just said previously, there are litigators and there are amicable lawyers, and the outcome of your divorce is so dependent on the type of lawyer you hire. So if you're hiring a lawyer and that lawyer is in the courtroom in front of a judge, most of the time, that's a litigator. And those lawyers like to litigate, and litigation is the last resort for divorce. It's very costly, it's very stressful, it takes a lot of time, it sucks the life out of your family. And some couples have to do that, but that should be the last resort. Many couples can get through a more amicable process. So if you wanted a lawyer, you should look for lawyers that are amicable, and there are a different category of lawyers. The other thing I'd say is a lot of people don't understand what mediation is. I think there's a misconception that I can't trust myself in mediation because I'm not represented.
Right.
And a lot of people get input from friends and family, and they say, well, you need a lawyer. You need to protect yourself from him or her. But they don't realize that you are protected in mediation, and you have the right to make your own decisions. And a good mediator will help you come to good compromises that help you both move on in a good way.
It's so interesting, because I don't mediate in the sense like you do. Every now and then I'm playing a financial neutral for people, and I always build that expectation that everybody has the right to say no. You do not have to agree just because an offer is made, and you can counter. And I think those are so important. And the entire dynamic of the divorce sometimes changes as soon as somebody, so to speak, lawyers up, right?
Right.
It could be going very amicably, and then somebody hires a lawyer and it sends a message, oh, now it's going to be, adversarial or something like that. It may not have that intent, and the lawyer may not, but sometimes just that action, even if it's, the first action, or even if it's a second, sometimes sends a message in that. And I think sometimes we lose who we are. We're not even sure who we are anymore. And so I think that's also a common mistake people make. You got to kind of relearn a little bit of who you are. I was married 20 years. Clearly, I had a wife. I had 3 kids. When I was getting divorced, I can't say I knew all the things that really brought me joy anymore, right? Because you give yourself over to the coupleship, you give yourself over to the kids. So how do we build this new life? I think you need to think about that. Spend a little time on that.
Yeah, it's hard to do that when you're going through the divorce, because
Right.
you talk about a food pyramid, like, all of a sudden the divorce is at the top of your pyramid. It's beyond, it's just so pervasive in everything you do, and you just have to get through it. But when you mediate, you actually work together, And it's like, it's actually surprising. Like when I mediate, I start with the parenting plan because for a lot of reasons, but I ask a lot of questions that couples haven't thought about, and I see them look at each other like, I don't know, I haven't thought about that. What do you think? And, you know, it just gets to a point where it's a very enjoyable conversation and people are able to actually think rationally and plan. Whereas when you go through a litigated divorce, it's very reactionary because your lawyer tells you, you have to be here, you have to decide this is what the judge said, and you're just responding. But in mediation, you control everything and you're able to discuss it and make good plans.
I also think it gives the opportunity to show the true amicable approach that somebody might want, right? If you go to court, the whole setup is adversarial. If you go to mediation and you start to have a healthy discussion, it's a whole different look of that partner to say, oh, they're not trying to take me for every penny I have, or, you know, whatever it might be. You have that opportunity to build a consensus. And I think one of the very important things about that is it helps us as a couple move forward after the divorce is final to work together as well. And sometimes we need that structure and guidance to be able to do that we weren't able to accomplish in our coupleship. But it's a starting point to be able to build the next chapter, or really the first chapter in the rest of your life, working as a team, even though you're not married anymore. And I think that's another piece that becomes a very positive for the kids and can impact them severely or not so severely and quite minimally, depending on how that process goes as well.
Yeah, you hit on one of the biggest benefits. Mediation builds a foundation to help you preserve your ability to co-parent and have joy in your children. Because you're working together, you're not working against each other, you're establishing new communication, you're actually making commitments. I always chuckle when I'm in mediation. I say, I know you're getting divorced, but I'm going to ask you to make a commitment to each other about how you're going to co-parent. And I always tell them, I said, marriage is hard, you have to work on it. Divorce and being co-parents is hard, you have to work on it. And most mediators really want good outcomes. So we work towards helping them build those communications and that foundation to help them be healthy afterwards. And one of the things about divorce, and you may know as well, there's so much mental stress after divorce, and it takes people varying degrees of time to get back to feeling themselves. So when you litigate, there's so much baggage. You know, you're upset with the judge's decision, you're upset with the lawyer's tactics, you're upset with what your spouse did, and it takes years for that to simmer for you to become yourself again. But when you mediate, every decision you make yourself. So when you're done, you're ready. I mean, there's no anger, there's no thoughts about how it went down, because you made every decision. And literally on the next day, you're healthy, you're mentally healthy, you're able to move forward, and hopefully I say you don't have to be friends, but you should be friendly with your spouse. You don't have to be holding hands, but you should be standing next to each other with respect to your kids. And it's a high bar, but that's what I try to get my clients to achieve.
Well, I think it's so important because everybody thinks that, if they go to court, the judge is going to see it my way. I'm right? And I'm going to have, so to speak, my day in court. And you're lucky if you kind of get your hour in court. You really don't get the time to build your case and really speak about it the way that you want to and get the judge to empathize. It just doesn't happen. And now that you're in mediation and you're talking through and discussing and looking at options and what about, you really, in a way, it's therapeutic because you're working through the issue in a therapeutic way, but you're also coming to a decision that works for everyone. And I like that idea of commitment. And sometimes people can't commit to the other spouse, but they can commit to their kids, and it's as much, I think, in many ways, especially on the parenting plan, commitment to the kids to move forward as it is maybe to that other parent. So I think those are all huge, huge positives that you brought up. So
I want to add a couple things.
Yeah, please.
That's okay. You're right. You don't get your hour. When you said you don't get your hour in court, you don't even get to speak in court. Oftentimes your lawyer speaks to the judge. There's so many times I stood next to my lawyer and I just had to lean over and whisper in his ear and say, I don't think the judge really understands how that financial instrument works. And he said, it doesn't matter. He already decided. So you don't even get to talk a lot of times, which is frustrating. But the other thing about mediation is, sometimes if you're working with a good mediator, with the mediator who's informed about the state, the rules, regulations, the concept of what's allowed, not only helps each spouse hear each other, but in my mind, my job is also to make sure before a spouse makes a decision, they understand the decision. So I'm not a lawyer. I can't advise them on the law,
Right.
but I understand what their options are. And sometimes a couple might make a quick decision. And in my mind, I know, wow, if that spouse understood what the rights were or what the parameters were, they might make a different decision. So a good mediator will help both spouses understand what the parameters are before they decide, so that good decisions are made. So you're guided towards fair and equitable compromises.
Right. The other thing I think brings so much benefit from a perspective, somebody who's been through it, somebody who works with a lot of people and has this ability to bring people together, is you're going through a divorce. You don't always realize what the impact of a decision is 6 months or 6 years down the road. And that's where sometimes someone like yourself can build that expectation or bring that reality testing into the conversation that they would never be thinking about, because most people going through divorce are thinking about right now, today, how do I get through today? Someone like yourself can help them really think through, how will that play out? So your kid's turning 18, how does that decision now, they're not thinking that in the same way you do, which I think is a very, very big benefit as well. So
Yeah. We often try to get them to think through the different stages of their children's development and what their children's needs are going to be when they're young versus older, and how that affects the parenting plan and how you should think about adjusting it. And, college education, do you want to set up savings plans now? You don't have to, you're not required to, but would you like to commit to doing that each so that you have something later down the road? So we really want them to have a good outcome.
Yeah. And it's they say when you go to court, if both of you feel like you lost, then it's a successful court case. When you go to mediation, you should both try to feel like you've won. So it's a very, very different view.
Yes.
And again, I mentioned earlier, I went through mediation training not to be a mediator, but to help prepare my clients better, right? I just felt they weren't walking into those sessions prepared and have thought through a lot of the issues. Clients make big decisions when they go to mediation, and they're not always thinking it through. As we said, you can share 6 months, 6 years down the road how it's going to be an impact. How do you advise couples and people going through or preparing for mediation? How do you say, these are some things you should think about? How do you help them prepare?
So I might be the contrarian. So when I do my consultations, I offer free consultations, and I'll talk to couples as long as they want, an hour, multiple times. And during the consultation, I help educate them on what are their priorities. If they're willing to share what their family and financial situation is, what are their huge priorities that they need to focus on? So when they come into mediation, they know, hey, it's these 2 or 3 topics are the big ones. But other than that, to be honest with you, I try not to worry my clients with preparing. Sometimes they ask, what do we need to do to prepare? And I said, nothing, just show up, but come with a mind where you're willing to listen to each other, hear each other, and work towards compromises and be fair and transparent. And if you just come with that mind, I'll guide you. So there are certain parts in the mediation where some preparation is needed.
Right.
So the financial aspect for sure. So I will advise them a couple meetings before we get to that on what it's going to look like, what information I need, and I'll guide them through how to prepare that. But I like to start with an unstructured mediation, because I start with the parenting plan, and the parenting plan is very easy. The parenting plan is just 2 people who know their kids better than anyone in the world trying to think of a plan that's healthy for them. And that part of it doesn't require preparation. And I often stop the first meeting and say, this isn't that hard, is it? And they both go, no, I was kind of stressed, but this is pretty easy.
Right.
So I try to start with that so they get some confidence and start to get some behaviors going where they're interacting and communicating and just making some good progress. And then before the big topics, I will tell them in advance, hey, next week or in 2 weeks, we're going to talk about this. So I want you to start thinking about that.
Right.
There's a lot of people that I think there's some merit to it, that before they go through divorce, they should be prepared, understanding all their finances. So in what I would say is more contentious divorces where it is going to be litigated before you do divorce, there's probably a lot of value in understanding where your accounts are, where your passwords are, where your statements are, having that information, because sometimes your spouse may not provide that to you. So in a case where it's litigious, I would definitely prepare financially with someone like yourself. In mediation, I think it's easier to guide them week by week.
Right. No, I appreciate that. You know, what you said actually struck a thought in my head. For this show is nationally, right? It's on the internet. It could be listened all over the world. I know there is somebody actually in Switzerland that listens to our show. The thought, though, is that you should really understand how mediation is done where you are as well. Some places they will take topics and they'll do 2 to 4 hour sessions. There are some areas where they literally sit, they meet at 8 or 9 in the morning and they go the whole day, and hopefully they knock it all out in that day. And it's not a 2 to 4 hour session. It is literally an 8 or 9 hour session sometimes. So just a thought, just be aware of how that works. And it can be draining being there for a whole day. But the good thing is, if you mentally aware of it and mentally prepared, it could be a way to get it all done. So just know your jurisdiction, I guess, on how they do it. Michael, before we go to break, because we're running a little late on that, but before we do, can you share, how can people get in touch with you or learn more about your services?
Oh, sure. My website is michaelsmediation.com. And you could read all about me and my process. And there's a lot of good resources about divorce that could help you get educated. And you can also contact and reach out to me via my website.
And I encourage people to do that. Again, that's michaelsmediation.com. You can reach me at lifecycle.financial, and we will be right back. Thank you. Hello and welcome back to WGSN-DB, the Going Solo Network. This is the Financial Wellness Hour. I am your host, Hirsch Serman. And again, you can reach me at my website, lifecycle.financial. Our guest today is Michael Cohen from Michael's Mediation. And we covered a tremendous amount. I actually was trying to scribble as much down as I could. I am going to share a little bit more, but our topic today is, should I prepare for mediation? And obviously, we started with a little bit of your story and your experience of going through your own divorce and understanding that this was not a great process to go through. There is definitely a better way. And you are one of the people I interact with quite often who is working towards that. And I do find more and more, when I got divorced 10 years ago, by the way, there were very, very few resources as a whole. I find so many people who've gone through a divorce have that same attitude of, wow, this is terrible. There's got to be a better way to do it. And I think doing it in a better way creates better co-parents in many ways as well. Some of the other things that we spoke about, common mistakes that people make, who can mediate as a couple, really anyone. You can go straight to court if you want, but neither one of us recommend it. I know CC sitting behind the scene there also is not a big fan of people going straight to divorce. We spoke about giving some advice to people mediating, not necessarily from, which I like your approach, not stressing them out as, here's a list of everything you got to think about. Here's a list of every paperwork you've got to have. Here's a list of, which can be very daunting, let alone, the emotional piece of that. We did speak a little bit about your first move does not have to be going and lawyering up, and that can sometimes send the wrong message as well. And I think I ran out of time in things to write down. I know that we covered a fair bit more than that. But we spoke a little bit about kind of creating your future through mediation and the ease of, knowing your knowing your kids and being able to speak around your kids and committing to each other and to your kids for their sake even if the marriage didn't work, but, to keep the kids safe and to keep them being able to thrive, which I think is really every parent's goal in so many ways. And it's natural that you want to protect your kids. I think often it's natural we want to protect ourselves, and we're nervous about that outcome. As we've said, how would you reply to a couple that says, oh, I think I need a lawyer to advocate on my behalf, or, I don't feel comfortable without a lawyer being, part of my team. And I'm going to couple that, I think, a little bit, because often when people come to you and they have a nervous or concern, it could be, I need an attorney. It could sometimes be they feel there's imbalance of power maybe between the parties, whether it's knowledge, whether it's one personality is a much stronger personality. Work, that's what I do. I negotiate. They don't, whatever it is. I'm going to ask you to touch a little bit on those. I know there's a few things that I asked you there, but take free reign on how you want to attack that.
Yeah, I'm really glad you asked that, because that's probably one of the biggest misunderstandings. So, and that's where people get guided. You need a lawyer. Well, let me just tell you that as part of the mediation process, if you have children, 70% of the mediation is on the parenting plan, and you do not need a lawyer for any aspect of that. In fact, in the state where I primarily work, the judges want you to mediate before you even come into the courtroom. They don't want to work on your parenting plan. The judge doesn't want to make decisions about your kids. So they will force you to go to mediation. And that's 70% of the process. So I always encourage people, start with the parenting plan. It's 70% of what you have to do. You don't need a judge or a lawyer at all. This is just you and your spouse making decisions about what's right for your children. When you get to the finances, it's a little bit of a different story. There are instances where a lawyer can be helpful. And what I like to do is I like to call my practice more of a collaborative mediation practice, because I will advise people when there's an issue on the financial end that might require some financial or some legal input. I'll advise them both ahead of time that this might be a good time to seek counsel. And what I would do is I've got a network of amicable lawyers who don't charge full retainers or don't charge enormous fees and are willing to either do a free consultation or a fee for a session or a small retainer. And instances that come to mind are where there's one primary wage earner and they've been married a long time. So alimony is going to be a big issue. That's going to be a big number. And for the spouse who isn't working, that's going to be a very critical issue. So I will always advise that person, hey, we're going to talk about alimony in 2 weeks. This might be a good time where you might want to seek some counsel just to understand what your options are. And here's 2 or 3 names that you might want to talk to. They're wonderful lawyers and they could give you some input so you understand your options. The same thing goes for higher wealth couples who have, when we go through the financial divisions, depending on the laws in your state, it's good to be informed about what to expect. So I will always invite them to bring their lawyer to the session if they'd like. No one has taken me up on that, but I do think it's a good idea to seek counsel. So if you're working with a good mediator, they're going to tell you, hey, this is an issue that has material impact and it's dependent upon the law and you should be informed before you make a decision. And that's not costly. Like I said, most of these attorneys will give free consultations or charge by the hour, and it's well worth it. The other thing I would say is when you're finished with mediation, a lawyer reviews the entire agreement and makes sure that it's fair and reasonable. And then when it goes to the judge, at least in the state that I work in, the judge reviews it and makes sure that it's a conscionable, fair agreement. So you always have lawyers and judges' eyes on it, and you always have the right to bring a lawyer into the process for the critical issues. But for most of the process, the parenting plan, for example, you do not need a lawyer.
Right. And I think once you go through the parenting plan, especially with the approach that Michael takes, I think you can see the value in mediation and being able to continue into that financial piece, before you start bringing all the lawyers into it and all the other people that are there. You said something that I just kind of need to highlight a little bit, because, the state you work in predominantly has a formula for the maintenance of what used to be called alimony. Not every state does. In fact, relatively few have that. Every state has a child support calculation. The child support calculation is kind of one of the sacred cows that attorneys are not going to play with or waive. Sometimes, people want to waive that. there are certain things like that you really do need to understand. Again, more of the roles and responsibilities that you have, being able to do that. So there may be times where you want to consult with a lawyer, but to have them kind of at your elbow all the time can be a very costly piece without the necessity or without the real, positive impact that you think it's going to bring sometimes as well, especially when you're paying anywhere from, $300 to $800 an hour, depending on where you are. Just something to consider as well. So.
Yeah, I agree. The lawyer is the most expensive person in the process, and they understand the law. But divorce is so much more than the law. It's finance, it's emotion, it's parenting. And if you want to take the highest paid resource by far and pay them for every phone call, email, call, every motion, every court appearance, just to come and shadow you on the emotional and the financial aspects, to me, that's a waste of money. And it's most families that I see, especially now, a lot of people are paycheck to paycheck. They're not swimming in money, and the money that they spend on a lawyer could be well in excess of a year of college or 2 years of college for their children. Like, save that money. You could save so much money for your family by doing it the right way and not involving the most expensive resource in every aspect of your divorce.
And I think, traditionally anyway, the major player from the professional was always an attorney. Mm-hmm. If you ask the average person, who do you need going through a divorce, they're going to tell you it's an attorney. The attorney is great from a legal perspective, as you said, but not all of them are great mediators. Michael's your mediator. You want to pick the right person on your team or the right professional to do the right task. I certainly wouldn't go to a $500 an hour attorney if I need a therapist. That's going to be a very expensive therapist with very little positive result. And I'm not knocking attorneys, because I wouldn't want my clients coming to me as their therapist. I'm not a trained therapist. I am trained in the financial side with a CDFA and a CPA. Those are the kind of things that sometimes you got to understand as well. The attorney is great for their role, but they don't necessarily play every role that you need. So as you said, 70% of the process, you probably don't need an attorney. The financial piece, they may not fully understand it as an attorney. Putting that document together, the settlement agreement, and reviewing it, and the legal guidance, that's where they play and that's where they excel. So again, having the right people in the right place, I think, are very, very important for all of this.
Yeah.
So a quick, we don't have a whole lot of time, but I have a lot more questions. So I'm going to try to cherry pick them. What are some mistakes or misconceptions people have about the process? And I guess a little bit, because we so focused on that end line of signing the marriage settlement agreement or dissolution agreement. But what are some of the mistakes or misconceptions that people have, like, okay, through the process and beyond, because they're not always thinking beyond? Any thoughts or comments around that?
Yeah. It revolves back to the kids again. And I've experienced it too. Like you said, divorce is a point in time. Most people are like, I can't wait to be away from him or her. Just get this done.
Yeah.
They don't realize that if they have children, their children are going to be going through all sorts of phases in their life, and that person is going to be in your life. So I never use the word soon to be X or X. It's going to be your co-parent for life. And, I just went through a situation where my child, years after my divorce, got married, and his mom was still in a bad space, and made the wedding uncomfortable. And, that's what I try to tell people. Like, you've got to find a way to be friendly together, because otherwise your kids are going to feel it. When I was in the corporate world, there was a term I used a lot: tone at the top. The leader sets the tone. And I tell my clients, you're at the top. If you are amicable and friendly and comfortable around each other, your friends, your neighbors, your kids will be amicable, friendly, and comfortable together. If you're at each other's throats, they're going to take sides and separate. So it's really up to each couple to decide what tone they want to set. And I try to guide them. It is long-term. It's a life if you have kids.
It's so interesting, because the chances are your kids, when they go to college or through their life, they're going to meet a lot of people who they were children and their parents got divorced, right? They say first marriage is about 41%. The statistic I've seen on second is over 60% of divorce. So the chances are your kids are going to have friends that went through the same dynamic in that way, that their parents got divorced. most kids, well, I don't want to say most, a lot of kids are going to be like, oh my God, that was an awful time in our life experience. How amazing would it be if you can have your kids turn around and go, you know, my parents really role modeled how to go through adversity and be stronger at the end, or teach me how to go through adversity, or how to face a problem and not lose their integrity. Like, if you think about it from those perspectives, but as you said, the tone is at the top. It comes from the parent being able to model that. And I think that becomes maybe one of life's best lessons you can ever teach your kids. I think that would be a huge positive for people. And I'm going to ask, we do have to wrap up. Give us one quick, best experience that you've had mediating.
Oh, I just finished a couple about 3 weeks ago, and I'll be honest with you, they were one of my favorite couples. We met every Friday afternoon, and there was always laughter and jokes and what have you. It was a fun experience, but when we got done, one of the spouses wrote to me and said, "I'm going to miss meeting with you." I'm like, that's how, it's not stressful. It was a collaborative approach where we worked together and we put something together. And I'd like to think that I helped bring them together a little bit and kind of walk through this in a healthier way. That's
wonderful. And, you've almost built a role as a confidant, not as a mediator in many ways, I think that's a wonderful thing. It also shows that, people going through that adversity can work together, especially if they have the right people guiding them. So huge feather in your cap for that one. Before we do wrap up, where should people go again? Share your contact information, if you would, that people can connect with you.
Sure. The best place is my website, which is really easy, michaelsmediation.com. And you could contact me through there. And there's a lot of information to help you understand the process.
And there's a lot of blogs and other information out there that can help you to get better understanding if you would like that. Michael, thank you. It's always a pleasure, not just having you on the show. I appreciate the insights. I think a process that's very misunderstood, hopefully, is significantly clearer for people as they're going to go through this. I do encourage people to reach out to you, michaelsmediation.com. I am Hirsch Serman, your host for the Financial Wellness Hour. Please reach out to me through my website. It's lifecycle.financial. Again, lifecycle.financial. CC Schatz, my producer, thank you behind the scenes. Makes it so much easier for Michael and I to just have a conversation, have some fun, and get to know each other a little more and learn a little bit more, which is always key as well. I look forward to you all joining me in 2 weeks, and have a great rest of your week. Thank you for joining us.